Welcome to the Self-Publishing School podcast. This is the podcast to listen to if you're an aspiring writer or an author who wants to be more successful. On this show, you'll learn how to write and launch a book successfully, all from the top authors and people just like you who are doing it at the highest level. I'm your host, Chandler Bolt, the founder of Self-Publishing School, the author of the book called Published, and the CEO of selfpublishing.com. For free training on how to publish a book that sells 10,000 copies, go to selfpublishing.com/free training.
Your first audience member when you're writing a screenplay is the person reading it. The thing is if you want to do that, you have to then be able to have something of value to bring to them that they don't have. That's how you build up your sense of value. That's the business strategy. Is people don't pay you for your hour or for your time. They pay you for the 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 hours you put in to be able to deliver that value. Do you want to spend the next 10 years figuring out everything I've figured out in the last 10 years? Or do you want me to support you?
Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is Derrick Rydell. Derrick, he's the author of a bunch of books, self-published. He got, we were talking just beforehand, just got a big publishing deal for some of his next books, and has been kind of a bunch of different types of books. He's had a lot of success with books, including his book is called Emergence, 7 Steps for Radical Change, and a bunch of other books. He's coached Fortune 500 execs. This is a fun fact. He's written 20 feature film screenplays, maybe more than that at this point. That's just the stat that I have. And he's written a book. In my research, I found this. I was like, this is a fun angle. It's called I Could Have Written a Better Movie Than That, How to Make 6 Figures as a Screen Consultant, even if you're not a screenwriter. So we're going to zero in on some of that stuff because we'll talk about his book journey, but we'll also talk about screenwriting and becoming a 6-figure screenwriter or script consultant. I've never even heard of that. So we're going to dive into what that is. And I think this will be fun because we haven't talked a lot on this podcast about script writing, screenplays. I think when we had Stephen Pressfield on here, maybe he talked about his experience writing screenplays, or it was either on this podcast, so you guys can check out the previous episode with him, or maybe it was at Author Advantage Live, our conference where he talked.
I'm sure Stephen did, because Stephen definitely has written scripts as well as books.
Oh, yeah.
Legend of Bagger Vance was a book, and then it became a movie. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that and maybe one other episode is the only other time that we've talked about screenplays and screenwriting and all that. So, and I know we get questions about it all the time. So we got a lot to cover. We'll dive in. Derrick, great to have you here.
It's my honor and pleasure, man. I actually have a new movie in pre-production right now. So
you are kidding. All right. Well, we're going to get into that in a bit. I'm excited to hear more about that. I guess for starters, why books? Why did you start writing books, and why did you write your first book? And maybe even, was it a book first or a screenplay first?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I mean, it's all a journey of reclaiming more and more agency. So I was an actor, and I was, kind of part of a new brat pack, and I was doing films, and I was down to the wire with multiple movies. And then I would get down to me and one other person, and they would be a star, and so they'd get the part. And so I kept experiencing this. I'm like, I'm going to take some agency under my control. So I began to write screenplays and began to develop my screenwriting ability. And people will read my scripts and think those are amazing, but for whatever reason, they wouldn't get made. They wouldn't buy them. But you're a good writer. Come and consult on our screenwriting and our screenplays. So that was kind of how the consulting started. And then I was doing a lot of options with screenplays, but nothing was getting made. And if you're a screenwriter, it's hard to, if you're just a writer of books, the thing you write is the thing. If you write screenplays, it's a blueprint for the thing, right? It's like being an architect and writing all these blueprints and never seeing a house get built. You don't have an office papered with blueprints. Hey, come look at my blueprints. It's the house, it's the building. So I kept creating these blueprints, i.e. screenplays, and they weren't getting made. And I'm like, I had to take it one step closer. What's the thing I can create that is the thing? Even if I have to self-publish it and hand out 1,000 copies to friends and family, at least the work I've made will be appreciated and will make a difference. And that drove me eventually to write books. And at first, writing books was like it was hard. It was the last thing I ever wanted to do. It felt like I was back in English class, because screen was fun. And
Yeah.
I was making movies, and and but I did the work and dug in, and got over my issues with my 11th grade English teacher, and I began to write books. And the first books I wrote were around the entertainment industry, around how to succeed as a writer, even if you're not getting your movie made or whatever. So was a lot of different categories. And this was in the early days of things that are now called Fiverr and Upwork. And they used to be even more easily accessible sites. And I began to take all the skills I'd stacked as a writer, as a reader, as a person who understood story and structure and all of that, and began to offer my skills and begin to build a business as that. In fact, I don't know if you know that book, Think and Grow Rich.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had an initial program out there. It's not around anymore, called Ink and Grow Rich. INK, right? How to write, how to get wealthy with your writing. And by all those skills I had stacked, I began to build a six-figure business, consulting and all of that. And then I ended up consulting on a lot of scripts, and some that became movies and things like that. And then I wrote a book called I Could Have Written a Better Movie Than That.
Mm-hmm.
Was that what it's called now? I'm drawing a
Yeah,
blank.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that became really successful and started to help people launch their work, all these struggling writers and screenwriters. And then I also had a near-death experience along the way. And out of that, all the stuff I was learning about the deeper purpose of my life. And I began to write another book called There's No Business Like Soul Business.
Mm-hmm.
That became a really popular book. And I sold both of those books to a traditional publisher. And that became a popular book that, actors and writers and producers and I began to be a consultant to media moguls and Academy Award winning writers and producers. And it just kept expanding. So that was kind of the journey, of doing that. First I tried to write. I was an actor, couldn't get the starring roles as often. So I became a writer of the scripts, couldn't get them made. So I became a writer of books. And then I took all the skills I'd stacked and began to find a way to make a business out of all those skills, whether something got published or not. That was kind of the journey to writing books, if that makes sense.
That's cool. What a fun journey. What would you say, knowing what you know now? I mean, obviously having experience doing a bunch of both. What are the key differences in what it takes to write a good screenplay versus what it takes to write a good book? How much of it is like, hey, this is kind of the same thing, and what of it is very different?
Yeah, well, first of all, just writing a lot and reading a lot and watching and engaging and ingesting a lot of content over a period of time. If you keep ingesting and writing, ingesting and creating, you begin to understand rhythms, and you begin to understand, because the very best writing has a musical quality to it, a rhythmic, a flow, a rhythm to it, a cadence. So you begin to understand that almost through osmosis. So there's, in my opinion, nothing more important if you want to write anything, especially if you know what the thing is you want to write. Read a lot, ingest a lot, and write a lot. Writing needs to become a habit. A writer writes, right? An athlete does athletic activities every day, right? They don't just do it when it's game time. They don't just do it when somebody's paying them. They do it all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fish are really good at swimming because they're swimming all the time. So you have to. So that was the first thing is the process of doing it, and I have passion for it. But there's other things, and they're different. It depends. If you're writing a screenplay, you have to understand the medium, whether it's a screenplay for film or for TV or a stage play or a nonfiction book or a novel. They all are different mediums of expression. So you have to understand what are the tools and the form, and why did that medium emerge in history in the first place? Because it emerged because it was able to do something that the other medium couldn't. So you have to understand that. Like stage is where a lot of, obviously drama started. It started around the tribal fires, but then eventually it got, they said, hey, get away from them, move over there onto that rock and tell us your story. So it became a stage, but it became much more about the dialogue So a stage play is much more about dialogue because you're not going to have a ton of sets. Obviously, we've grown in our ability to do different sets, but a stage play tends to have unity of place and not too many set pieces. Again, that's gotten better over time.
Yeah.
So that you have to think in unity. And what can I create where it mostly happens in one or two places? And with minimal, again, initially minimal props, minimal effects. So it's all about dialogue and theme and character, of course. And then the screenplay came along, or rather, then there was the novel that came along, and that was how can I explore the inner realm of a person? How can I have two people sitting at dinner and they're just saying some stuff, but actually the whole journey is what they're thinking about? Because again, you can do some of that on stage, but they have to kind of keep doing it to a side, So anyways, I'm sitting here with this guy and I'm thinking, but in a book, you can take us on a journey of a whole lifetime in a novel by their inner thoughts. So that was where novels emerged, because you could get much more in depth, and you could also do much longer, because you're not going to sit there for 100 hours and watch a stage play, but you could tell a journey where you could put it down at chapters and pick it back up again. So that's where the novel emerged. And then film emerged because we had all these different abilities to have sound and sights, and we can now create epic journeys and bring together sound and music and visuals to create a more holistic and fully dimensional experience. So you have to understand the history, or you don't have to, but it helps. And then a screenplay, you only got sight and sound to work with. So if you come from writing a lot of themes and ideas and overly verbose thoughts and all of that, if you can't film it, you can't put it on the page. Now you can cheat. There's ways to cheat, but fundamentally you have to learn the ability to express in the show don't tell mode. So that's where screenplays are different. And then obviously, if you want to write about, like this was part of my consulting, somebody would come to me with an idea and say, what's the best way for me to do it? And if they came to me and they had a bunch of ideas they wanted to explore, I want to explore the nature of consciousness and the nature of this and that and quantum physics or whatever, some ideas, or why school, education is so bad or something. And they may have had some story to it, but what they were really excited about was the ideas. Then I would say, unless you're truly like an A-level writer with the ability to turn that into drama or fiction, you're probably meant to write a nonfiction book. And so it goes. So you have to look at, what am I most excited? Is it the ideas, the concepts? It's probably a nonfiction work of some kind, whether it's an essay or a self-help or whatever. Am I more interested in the drama and the conflict and how that reveals it? Then it's probably fiction. And then have I learned mostly from watching or from reading? And if it's mostly from reading, you've built the neural pathways and developed by osmosis a greater understanding to write a novel or some form of fiction. If you've learned it more from watching, then you've built more of a visual catalog, and you should probably start there. I know that was a very long answer, but
that's a really interesting distinction of, even just because I'm sure there's people who are watching this or listening to this thinking, okay, should I write screenplays? Should I write fiction? Should I write nonfiction? And I think the distinction of, are you excited about the ideas or about the writing or the mechanism or the drama or whatever? And I think that layered with, what do you primarily consume? Because then to your point, there's those neural pathways of, hey, I read a lot of nonfiction books. I probably kind of understand the structure of that. Oh, by the way, writing nonfiction is way easier because the ideas carry the weight, and the writing, should be good, but it doesn't have to be, right? Whereas if you're writing a screenplay, if you're writing fiction, I mean, the writing needs to be great. We always joke, kind of gets people riled up. We've got a whole fiction side of the business at selfpublishing.com, but the running thing is like, real writers write fiction. Because this is like, it's really, really hard. You mentioned that, I guess the other piece that you mentioned that I found really interesting was understanding the mechanism, how it came to be, and then writing to that. I remember, I want to say, I was looking at my notes, but I couldn't find it. I want to say it was Stephen Pressfield that because I've never done any screenwriting, obviously. And so it just was, it's very foreign to me and very interesting. But I want to say it was him that said something similar to what you were saying. He's like, you don't think about it, but when you're writing a book, you can be so descriptive, right? This person was, his mom died, right?
Right.
But but then when you get that in a movie, it's like how do you show that?
Yeah.
And how he's like, you get really good at writing in like, okay, in this minute segment, we can reveal 5 different details about this character, develop that character to where now you understand all this context that I could have just written in a couple sentences in the book.
Exactly.
And that just unlocked, that's a small distinction that's actually huge that then bleeds into everything that you do and write. So are there other things that jump out like that, either per medium or just, again, kind of comparing books to screenwriting, that's just a
Yeah,
different way of thinking?
absolutely. And, part of this is it's again from, I've sat with the script and the movie or the TV show simultaneously to see how are they doing it. I've sat with the book and the script to see how did they, turn the book into the script. And to see these different translations, you really begin to know. And then also to create the thing and see it filmed or see it acted. In all those levels, you're going to learn, oh, that's what it really sounds like. That's what it really looks like. So, for example, yes, you can write in a book, he looked at Bob and he suddenly remembered, when he was 10 and, da 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 da. Or you can even cheat and say he looked at Bob or he looked at Sue and he loved her so much. Little did he know it was the last time he would see her.
Mm.
Right. And now we're like, uh-oh, reading, right?
Yeah.
It's a cheat, but now it hooks us to keep reading. But now if we're watching that scene, you can't have a narrator. I mean, you could, but it's really cheating. He's looking at Sue and he's loving her. And then you say, little did he know she would, you can't cheat. So you have to find how do I create that moment? But similarly, you might write a book where there's, a page of describing the emotions of Bob or a whole monologue that Bob is expressing, to be or not to be, a whole monologue. And then in the screenplay, all it is Bob looks at Sue and, a tear drops down his face, or he takes her hand and he just squeezes it. And in the context of the story, and in fact, I get chills thinking about it, we get everything. We don't need the monologue. We don't need anything. We get it. Because when you see Bob and you see Sue on screen and you see them looking and you see him squeeze her hand and you remember a scene before where he said, the first time I took your hand, I knew I would be with you forever. And then when he takes her hand now, the same way he described it in that previous scene, it all makes sense. So that's where you can't do that as easily in a book. In fact, there's been many examples where even in a screenplay, you write all this dialogue and then the actor comes, over to the director and says, or the writer, this is beautiful, but I can do all of this with a look. So it's like, and then boom, they do a look, and it's like, ugh, I could never have written it better, right? So it's understanding again the medium. There's a whole different, and that takes a lot of confidence and trust to develop that. And there's a whole other sidebar, which is there's a difference between a reading script and a shooting script, right? You write a script to make a movie in the reader's mind first. You have to be able to write it in such a way without all the cheating that it produces that emotion and produces that internal movie. But when they go to shoot it, a lot of that changes. As I said, we don't need as much of this. We don't need all the little parenthetical things that tell the actor how to say it or do it. We often don't even need as much of the dialogue. It can be done like that, or it can be done with a shot. We see him take her hand. We see the sun rising or setting, and the music swells, and we get it all. So understanding how much you can do with a multimedia expression like a movie or a TV show, that changes how that happens a lot. And that's always something you can learn by doing it, by watching it, by looking at a book, the novel versus the script versus the movie. You can even get some of that, reading really great nonfiction work. You can also pick up on similar tools, some of the very best nonfiction, not sometimes self-help, but usually it's more, nonfiction memoir or nonfiction reporting. where you're like, oh my God, the turn of that phrase or the way they described that,
Yeah.
or even the terse, direct writing, the rhythm, it's gritty, it's real. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, you could take that and put that kind of writing in your novel. And sometimes even
Hmm.
in screenplay. So there's a lot of areas where it translates, but it's about, again, being a reader, being an ingester of content,
Hmm.
and 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 really looking for what really lights you up and what turns you on and taking note of that, because that's how you develop your unique voice and your unique style.
That's cool. I hope you're loving this episode so far. So if you're serious about writing and publishing your book, we would love to chat with you and help create a custom plan. All right. So all you need to do right now is go to selfpublishing.com/schedule. Schedule a 45-minute consultation with one of the experts on my team. All right. Let's implement what you're learning in this episode and let's see how we can help with your book. Go to selfpublishing.com/schedule. And I mean, I feel like an example of that. I'm about to finish up Steve Martin's biography and memoir biography.
Born standing,
Say that again.
born standing up.
Yes. And so it's very interesting where I'm hearing exactly what you're saying. It makes like a lot of sense. I'll look at that.
Well, he's a great writer. He's written screenplays as well,
and comedy,
and
right? So it's like,
comedy.
okay, he has been writing. And so as I'm going through this, it's like I'm laughing,
Yeah.
I'm entertained, I'm all that stuff. I think pretty similarly to Green Lights, the Matthew McConaughey. So it's like almost
Exactly.
you can see it, obviously he narrated it, so he's a great narrator, but
He's an
you can see
actor.
where that experience translates over. Now you mentioned a phrase that I just want to go back to.
Bill Maher's new book too, by the way. I mean, I know this kind of dates this conversation, but he has a new book, something like what this comedian will say will shock you or something. But it's all of his like ending monologues. But you just see again the decades of development of his writing, and it's both serious and comedic and thematic and comedic. And if you want to write things that are both meaningful and maybe funny and can balance those different elements, it's incredibly good writing.
Cool.
You may not agree with the politics, and that doesn't matter. Read it for the writing quality.
Cool. Nice. I'll check it out. You said there was a difference between a reading script and was it a movie script?
And a shooting script. And a shooting.
Oh, a shooting script. That's what it was. That's a really interesting distinction.
Yeah, because you have to, and again, there's there's some cheats you can do, and because your first audience member when you're writing a screenplay is the person reading it, and usually there is gatekeepers. It's not going directly to the producer or directly to your star or directly to the director. It's often going to readers, people that are reading for the agent or the producer or the director or the actor. And it often has to go through multiple readers. And the readers do what's called script coverage, where they give a synopsis, they say what they like about it, what they don't, and then they give it a grade. Consider, high consider, recommend, or pass, and 99.9% of all scripts are pass. And so, but but you have to first create and produce this movie in their mind. And you have to do it in a way where it's not overwrought and overwritten, and where it looks like you're trying so hard. And so again, how do you do that? The very best way is try to get your hands on some of the best screenplays that have been written and get them in their original screenplay form versus their shooting form. You don't always know that, but nevertheless, get a hold of them. And you can do that online. There's whole libraries of screenplays.
Cool.
But writing. But I'll also say what I believe is true is because I started in the fundamentals of drama and structure and storytelling and Aristotle's Poetics and the very fundamentals. And then eventually screenplays, which is one of the most difficult mediums because it's like, well, gosh, you don't have to write that many words compared to a novel. It's easy. No, it's harder. It's like that letter. What's that anecdotal story from what's his name? Huckleberry Finn, the writer. What's the guy with the big white?
Oh, Tom Sawyer.
He wrote Tom Sawyer and all that. The writer. I'm drawing a blank right now.
Oh, yep.
But he basically was writing this letter to a friend. He goes, I'm sorry, this letter is so long. If I'd had more time, it would have been much shorter.
Yeah.
And so the shorter form, the less amount of words actually is more difficult. but it focused me on the fundamentals of structure, of having to pull people in and hook people and say what is only needed and nothing more, and beginning, middle, and end, and setup and payoff, and all of those particular fundamentals of storytelling structure, so that when I went to even write nonfiction and began to build the frameworks for my nonfiction work, that same thing is incredibly important. Setting up a hook, the opening premise, not burying the lead, the ability to hook and to set up things that start to develop and pay off throughout. Because even if you're just writing about how to be a better person or whatever the thing might be, it's still a story in its own, in a different way. It's still a narrative, because we have literally evolved and adapted for story, right? We dream in stories, we think in stories, we tell stories all day long to ourselves and to whoever else will listen. Story is equipment for living. And when we learn the best, we learn because somehow it's in a context of a story. Either they're telling us a story or they're telling it to us in a way that helps us remember and relive our story. The more you understand the fundamental structures of good storytelling, you're going to be better across the board, giving a speech, writing a nonfiction book, writing a self-help book, writing a novel, whatever the script. So you cannot lose by getting an undergirding of those techniques.
Agreed. And if you're listening to this or watching this and you're interested in this on the book side of things, on the fiction side of our business, we have it's a program called Fundamentals of Fiction and Story. And so we dive through, 5-part story structure, all the stuff where Rami, who runs the fiction side of the business, just goes super in depth about writing great fiction novels. I want to shift, Derrick, for kind of our final time. We're in a final few minutes here, and I want to go lightning round on the business side of this. So, and like, what's the path to six figures as a screenwriter, as a consultant or script consultant, all that stuff. And I want to kind of understand, how do you get your first paid gigs in that arena? And then how do you really make it? I guess for starters, though, the question that's been on my mind since I kind of opened with this is, what does it even mean to be a script consultant? And how do you get a gig at doing that? Or is that better or worse than screenwriting? I know I'm throwing a lot of questions at you, but I'm just really curious on the business side of things.
I mean, you're taking me back to some, pulling out some of the oldies. They are, because I haven't been a script consultant for some time. I'm a professional screenwriter, and like I said, I have a movie in pre-production right now. And so I'm not even 100% sure what it is taking, what it takes today to do it. But there's the idea of a script consultant is a person who, or a script coach. And, there's many books out there. If you're into screenwriting, you all have probably, I thought I've written some of them, have read some of these books. One of the famous ones, Chris Vogler, The Writer's Journey, which was based on the hero's journey, based on the Joseph Campbell work. Chris Vogler was a script consultant and a film consultant. And then Disney took his model and turned it into a lot of their films, The Lion King and a lot of these films. So that's an example. I knew Chris, he was a script consultant, and Linda Seeger, another script consultant. There's a lot of very popular people that have been script consultants. And what they do on the most basic level, and can do for anybody that's a screenwriter, is they can write articles and things that teach about it. And then they take on clients who have written scripts or who want to write scripts or who have ideas for stories. And at any level, depending on what you want to do, they will coach you on how to take that. Like I said, somebody would come to me with 5 ideas, and I would help them identify what's the best, what's the one they're most passionate about, what's the one that's most commercial, what's the one that's most sellable for the times, et cetera, and then how to turn that into a 3-act structure, and then et cetera, all the way to they send me their outline, and I give them notes on the outline, or they send me their script, and I give them notes on the script. It could be a general analysis all the way to the most in-depth, all the way to being like a script doctor, which is actual doing rewrites of the script for them. Mm-hmm. And ultimately that led to me being hired to write people's ideas just from people all over the world. And then eventually to being hired to write at a much higher level with the writers, people that were hiring me on Writers Guild contracts, and then eventually being hired to write for a studio, but that's kind of was the journey, right? And then writing my own stuff and selling it on spec, which means speculative, where I haven't been paid, but I'm going to write the script. But I started with there's a large community of screenwriters out there, and by offering these services, whether you can help them write a better pitch, pick the right story, turn it into an outline, critique their outline, turn it into a script, critique their draft, edit or rewrite their drafts with them or for them. Those are like the span of it. But the thing is if you want to do that, you have to then be able to have something of value to bring to them that they don't have.
Right.
And you do that either by studying and being truly well equipped and well armed with the knowledge of what it takes to write a good script, having watched the best movies, analyzed the best scripts, even if you yourself aren't selling scripts at the time. If you've got that knowledge, you've taken all of that in, you can give them 100 hours worth of value, and they don't have to read all the books and watch all the things. You can give that. That's how you build up your sense of value. That's the business strategy. Is people don't pay you for your hour or for your time. They pay you for the 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 hours you put in to be able to deliver that value. And so whether you've gotten it from lived experience, like I've written a bunch of screenplays and sold movies and many options, so I've got a certain kind of lived experience, but I've also got 10,000 hours of studying and reading and writing as well. So wherever you find yourself on that, if you want to do that, then it's also, if you are a screenwriter and you are reading all the books and you are doing all this stuff, it's another way to supplement your income, because you've already been doing it. You've been putting in all these hours. I had read 100 books. I had written 1,000,000 words. I had, been through the mill many times, even though I had not yet broken through. So for those of you that have put in a lot of time and energy, this is another way to package it and then to position yourself with all of those hours and those years and that experience for the person that's a few steps behind you and hasn't put in all that experience. You can help them, save them days, weeks, months, or years, just because of all the experience you've been through and all the things you've learned not to do and to do. So that's how you want to position yourself, so that the value proposition is really clear. Do you want to spend the next 10 years figuring out everything I've figured out in the last 10 years? Or do you want me to support you and help you on Tuesday?
To consult. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's what it means to consult.
So then the script consultant is consulting for other screenwriters and helping them make their screenplays better. And then, so I guess that's the business side.
Or just even to get to turning it, to decide what to turn into a screenplay, or which idea, how to even make it an outline at first, all the way to the finished screenplay.
Right. That makes sense. So that I'm clear on the business model on that side of things. What about on the actual screenwriting side of things? Obviously, you've got a movie you said is in production, pre-production right now. When you're doing that, are you getting hired and paid by a movie house, by a director? Like, what is the business model?
There's a lot of ways. There's a lot of ways. Again, I first got hired by people that wanted to break into the film industry, that had the money to afford hiring somebody to write a screenplay.
Okay, cool.
So I first positioned myself with the experience as a consultant and all these different things. And whatever it is, if you have book writing experience or if you have a specific niche experience. That's
smart. So I'm sorry, I'm just going to interrupt and earmark that for folks who are saying, hey, how do I get my first paid screenwriting gig? That's super smart. Find someone who has a budget, who wants to make a movie, who needs screenwriting help, and you can pitch to them to be able to, it's almost like ghostwriting their movie. And so that you said you've done it that way. Sorry.
That's how I started. I evolved. Sometimes people would come to me with scripts they've tried to write because they wanted to break in and they were really terrible. And so I would become the new writer on that script, so to speak, and script doctor it or ghost write it, which is similar to script doctoring. And then maybe they'd have a new idea, or I'd help draw out of them or a better idea. And then I would pitch to them, either I'm going to first create an outline for you, and then you're going to hire me to write the script. Well, however the thing is. And there's business people that want to get involved. There's entrepreneurs that want to make movies. There's dentists and doctors that want to make movies. So I worked with people, all around that were executives, business owners, dentists, doctors, neurosurgeons who wanted to write movies And then eventually, as I went into books, some of them who want to write books, and and help them to do the same thing there, to help them develop their book or their book proposal. So again, you can fan out in different ways. We're just focusing on this, but I took all of those stacked skills and I just kept going, what's the next level? What's the next level? And built multiple six-figure business, being able to provide those services, whether I was consulting, and the consulting jobs got much more, my price got higher and higher as I was writing scripts for people. And then eventually I was able to enroll some of these higher level clients to invest or pay me to write my script, my idea, which had an even better a chance of selling and them actually, making a deal on, which is like basically getting a producer.
Got it.
And then eventually I was selling my scripts and optioning my scripts to studios and things like that, or independent producers. And then eventually, those would get made or not. You can have a lot of option deals when they don't get made.
And that's kind of the holy grail, right? I mean, that's where you're selling it directly. It sounds like to studios or independent film companies.
Yeah. And I had, and you can either have an option deal or you might get what's called a development deal, where they hire you to develop an idea in stages. Or you can just sell a spec script outright. That's less common if there's a competition for it, like if there's a bidding war for it. If multiple people want it, then you can often sell it outright. If you're just an agent's going or a producer's going to another company and there's not a competition, they'll usually option it for a period while they try to put the package together, while they try to bring on a director, bring on the actor, all that kind of stuff. And then they pay for the script in full before the film or when the film starts shooting.
I see. So if you're optioning a script, is that something to the effect of, okay, I shop this to the film studio or the independent film company. Let's just use round numbers. Let's say they're going to pay me $100,000, and then maybe there's some percentage of the gate. I don't know. But are they saying, hey, I'm going to pay you $10,000 for a 1-year option, and we have the option to make this movie within that year? If not, all right, now you can go back to shopping it. But if so, then kind of like you said, we would pay you that $100,000 before we make the movie. Is that typically how it works?
There's different ways to do it. Usually, it might be an option. The option deal has the sale price already built into it usually. And then depending on if you're non-union or union with the WGA, you're supposed to get a minimum of 10 or 15% of the purchase price for the option. But, there's a lot of ways it happens. Sometimes they'll give you very little to nothing for the option, and it'll be a 6 to 12 month option with the ability to re-option it for another 6 months. And then there's a purchase price in there, and then it's just a lump sum purchase at the end. Sometimes there's some kind of option up front, a money amount. But then again, usually what they're always trying to do is, if it's a studio, there's usually always at least an option money amount, if not outright purchase. But and there's just different seasons where things are hotter and they're just buying stuff more. But and that's gotten a little more difficult now. But when we had, I think it was in the late 80s, early 90s, the big spec boom where people were just putting scripts out there and studios were buying them for $1 million, $500,000, just like crazy. Those kind of times are gone for the most part. But and
what does that word mean, by the way? Spec?
It just means it's like people that build their houses speculatively and sell them. It means you're doing it, you're investing in building and creating something for no upfront money. I'm writing this screenplay speculatively, like I'm speculating, we'll see if it'll sell or not. And so you have power in terms of, I'm going to write it, I'm going to make it the way I want to make it. And then I usually can get more money for it when I sell it outright, versus if I'm hired to write that idea in a development deal, then I may not get paid as much. The difference is that you may also not sell it. So you may spend a lot of time on something. Eventually professional writers do a lot less speculative writing and wait till somebody hires them or buys an idea and then develops it. And that's where you want, at a certain level, you can pitch ideas, sell them, and then get hired to write the idea. So it's also where, professional writers usually go, similar to books, just like, with nonfiction books, you're writing a pitch basically in your proposal. You're not writing the whole book. And then you sell it based on that. So you don't have to put as much work into it. It's still a lot of work. Anybody that hasn't done it yet, Believe me, it's a lot of work.
Buckle up.
A lot more work than, yeah, buckle up. It's going to be turbulence. With a novel, with fiction, you usually have to write the whole thing. But once you've been a successful fiction writer, you can then sell novel ideas to a publisher without having to write the whole book because you have a track record. So it's similar to that.
This is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. What a fun conversation, Derrick. I could ask, I've got about 50 more questions, but I'll spare you and everyone else. And so just really, really fun conversation. Where can people go, as kind of a parting thing here, where can people go, Derrick, to find out more about you, your books, working with you, hiring you, whatever would be most helpful?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. We really went back, like I said, into the archive. So you can still get a couple of those books. I could have written a better movie than that. And There's No Business Like Soul Business. You can still get them. I think I don't sell them personally. The publisher sells them minimally, but I think you can still get those online. And then where most of my energy is now, whatever your thing is, if you want to write a book, be a successful author, teacher, writer of fiction, nonfiction, whatever. I have a community of a couple 100,000 people, and they are authors and artists and performers and teachers and coaches. And what I mainly focus on helping people do is getting clear on what it is they're trying to create, what it is that they are most here to create, what are they made for? And then instead of just their script idea, I help them take all of their life ideas and basically identify what's the best path for you. And then I help you master that path and turn that into a platform and live your work and make a living doing what you're made to do mostly. And then, of course, I have this domain expertise because a lot of my clients are writers. They do want to write books, so they are writing books. But as you know, also, it's not just the book. There's a lot more work around it. There's a platform, there's promotion, there's positioning, and probably even more important, you can have all the right tools, but if you don't have the right mind, if you're not in the right mind, you're most likely not going to be able to stick the course and stay through. So that's definitely something that I can help people do, is get in integrity with their deepest potential and purpose, and then stay the course until they absolutely succeed, because it's a very difficult and turbulent path to make a living doing what you love and to do it with excellence. So you can also go to my website, derrickrydall.com, DerrykRydall.com. And there's tons of free trainings there. And, download all the free trainings. They can also go to my podcast, Emergence, on iTunes. And again, dozens and dozens and dozens of trainings to help them to succeed.
That's awesome, Derrick. And I'm on your site right now. There's the programs page too, derrickrydall.com/programs. I'm looking through a bunch of your...
There's even one specific where that's not on my site. If they go to derrickrydall.com/quantum success, there's a special package there with multiple programs together for free. And that will walk them through a lot of things to take a quantum leap in their own success.
Love it. That's awesome.
I like how you do research. It's on the fly.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. This is amazing. Well, Derrick, thank you for humoring me. I know this is not what you talk about a lot these days.
No, I love it. I love it. Are you kidding? I mean, I'm as passionate about writing and books and movies more than ever, man.
Well, I know this has been really helpful, or I hope this has been really helpful for folks who are thinking about exploring this screenwriter, script consultant journey. Derrick, you're the man. Thank you so much.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you could be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help this podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you can be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. All right, number 1, I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help the podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode. If you're on the fence about scheduling a publishing consultation call with my team, maybe you're not quite ready for that, I've got some free training that I think will be really helpful for you. All right, all you have to do is go to register to sign up. Go to selfpublishing.com/free training. When you do, you're also going to get a free digital copy of my new book, Published. And on that training, you're going to learn the next steps, so how to implement with your book. So how to write, how to publish, how to launch successfully. So go to register right now at selfpublishing.com/free training. I'll see you there.